Welcome back to every comic shop in Massachusetts. In this video, I'll show you the other 24 shops in the state, all the way from the western border to Cape Cod. There's a link in the description to a video where I explain my grading process, and there's another link to the grading breakdown for each shop. This footage is from May of 2025, so some things might be outdated. Some of the most impressive and unique comic shops I've ever seen are in this video, and I'm really excited to share my passion for the small business side of comic collecting, which is so important to the hobby. Howdy, I'm Kurt Williams, and welcome to the second and final part of my tour of every comic shop in Massachusetts. Now, Massachusetts is not a big state, but it is a long state. And sure enough, we had to drive all the way across it to Lee, where we visited Main Street Comics, Toys, and More. This shop was pleasant and modest, just like the town it was in. This wasn't a very large space, but it did a great job of staying well stocked while also being well organized. The new issues were right up front, sorted by publisher, and labeled individually if they were new that week. Selection was pretty good, with plenty of indie books, including a couple that I hadn't heard of. They also had a separate section of Star Wars and G.I. Joe issues, probably due to the owner's severe addiction to those franchises. The back issues were at the back of the shop, back of the back, on a few shelves, and then wrapping around the corner and down one wall. Pretty sure they told me the back issues were the next thing on their list to update. These were either labeled individually or priced at the counter, and they were in pretty good condition, but priced higher than I would spend on these issues myself. In a state as waterlogged as Massachusetts, it's nice to find books that are dry and crispy, but something about having 14 copies of X-Force issue 1 for $8 each seemed a little off. Again, all these issues of Spider-Man are super crisp, and these issues of Avengers are equally clean and nicely bagged and boarded, but the prices scared me off. There was at least one box of relatively unsorted stuff, probably new inventory, that was considerably cheaper, so maybe by the time this video comes out, the average back issue price will be lower. Behind the back issues was a secret graphic novel cubby with pillows prepared for the extra determined reader. This graphic novel section wasn't huge, but it was quality. Practically no filler books, just great omnibuses, important stories, including a few that I don't often find in shops, and a good number of vintage graphic novels, like Son of Origins, The Incredible Hulk, and this team-up thrillers book that I'd never seen before and immediately went on my Christmas list. The indie selection was good as well, with this awesome giant robot volume, Ice Cream Man Sunday editions, and new volumes of Kaya. In the main area of the shop, there were some more newer editions of graphic novels, a few art books, and a good number of these oversized vintage magazines. One of the most impressive parts of this shop was the toy section, which was expertly curated and carefully packaged and labeled. This is the kind of packaging that convinces you of the value in the toys. If you're into Godzilla, this shop needs to be on your road trip itinerary. There were quite a few wall books behind the counter, mostly minor keys, but some heavy hitters like the first Elektra, X-Men issue 4, the first Miles Morales, Giant Size X-Men 1, and the first Batgirl. The shop also had some sick Star Wars helmets, a section of manga, a full G.I. Joe costume, a full Darth Vader costume, the Ewok Village complete with instructions, and plenty more cool stuff. They've only been around a couple years, but the shop feels well developed. So they earned 3 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 1 point in bargain section, 2 points in no wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Main Street Comics, Toys, and More with a total score of 16 out of 30 points. Which is not a flattering score maybe, but I did thoroughly enjoy the shop, and I think it's worth a visit. And just like I said in part 1, if you want to see a thorough breakdown of my rubric, go watch the rubric video, the link is in the description. If you want to see the score breakdown for each shop, go look at the score sheet, which is also in the description. The next shop was Comics and More in Easthampton. I don't know, y'all made fun of how I pronounce names in part 1. I don't know how you chowderheads pronounce these places. Comics and More was the only shop in all 3 states I've toured that asked us to wear masks, and before you ask, yes, this was in 2025. The owner is high risk though, so let's be nice everybody. Anyway, this shop was quaint and colorful, bursting with inventory, and undeniably lived in. The new issue section was at the back of the shop, sorted by publisher, and then alphabetically. The indie section was pretty substantial, but the new issues of the week weren't labeled, and it was hard to tell how many months worth of inventory was still on display. It looked like more than a few. I saw one new this week sign, but that definitely didn't describe the whole section. Next to the new issues, there were some wall books on display. Nothing crazy, priced reasonably probably. They were expensive enough that I couldn't afford them, I know that for sure. Then they had the good wall books up behind one of the counters, stuff like issue 1 of Daredevil, the first Alan Moore Swamp Thing, and the first issue of Saga. There was also a section of micro press and bootleg comics, not entirely sure what that means. The back issue section was pretty small, unless I missed a bunch of boxes, which is possible. These were all bagged and boarded more or less, and some of them were $3 or $4 each. Not too bad, but there were a few in there that had surprisingly high price tags. The graphic novel section was impressive though, with some art books and some new deluxe editions on display, and some crowded bookshelves in the middle of the shop that had pretty thorough selection. If you're looking for more obscure indie stuff, they've got you covered. If you're not looking for obscure indie stuff, they also have bookshelves full of Marvel and DC trades. In the back of the shop, there were some discount bookshelves. I don't remember how discounted they were, but it wasn't quite enough to convince me to get something. Based on this awesome Fantastic Four Civil War hardcover, I'm guessing they were half off. There were also some dollar bins, and the selection was pretty decent, but it didn't help that they were somewhat buried. This shop was definitely that type of shop that I normally love the most, just a dumping ground for nerdy stuff with lots of forgotten treasures tucked away under the piles waiting to be discovered. There were boxes of random stuff everywhere, plenty of unique decorations and drawings done by local kids, certainly plenty of character. I got weird vibes though, like maybe I didn't share the exact type of eccentricity the shop had. I'd love to poke around in the piles more though. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 1 point in no wow factor, and 1 point in organization. That leaves Comics and More in Easthampton with a total score of 17 out of 30 points. There's a lot of good stuff hiding in those piles. Next we went to the Northampton location of Newbury Comics, where we got nice and soggy in the rain before being in close quarters with valuable paper products. It's amazing how you can go from the street, which is surrounded by New England architecture, into a shop that could be any of the other locations. I bet every shop even orders the same exact light bulbs from the same wholesaler. The comic section was pretty comparable to the other Newbury locations, but they did have these cute comic stands that I don't recall seeing anywhere else. The selection of comics was pretty good, but no back issues that I could find at this location. The rest of the shop was all the typical Newbury stuff, like bat cuffs, novelty prank toys, nerdy shirts, pins, Funko Pops, figurines, and much more. I've already rated the largest Newbury location in part 1, so I won't be rating any more Newbury locations in this video. Next, we went right down the street to Holy Moley's Comics and Collectibles. To find this shop, you had to go through the Willy Wonka hallway and then down the basement ramp that isn't scary at all because there's a nice red carpet. It's not going to cave in, why would you say that? Anyway, as you enter the main floor of the shop, the first thing you see is a rack of analog science fiction and books by local creators. The new issue section was interesting. This was Friday, so some books probably sold out already, but the majority of the new issues were facsimiles and indie books. A few regular Marvel titles in there, but not really a full spread. The back issues were separated into indie, Marvel, and DC in different corners of the room. Here we have the indie back issues, which are bagged and boarded and sorted alphabetically, and some of which have price tags. I think the stickers are supposed to indicate what price they are. The DC section was a bit larger, and these issues were more thoroughly priced. Prices were decent, though I'm not familiar with the value of these Batman comics. The Marvel section was probably the biggest, and these were also nicely sorted, bagged and boarded, and clearly priced. Prices were fine, $3 or $4 for older issues, maybe a few that seemed a little steep. They had issue 223 of X-Men for $4, which is an acceptable price in my opinion. Another copy was $8, which I know is what Overstreet values a decent copy at, but I think that's ridiculous. The farther I got into the X-Men comics, the more I saw issues for $10 or $15 that I constantly see in dollar bins. There were quite a few wall books throughout the shop, mostly minor keys and interesting covers, like this awesome issue of House of Mystery. The most exciting thing on the rack to me was this first printing Ronin graphic novel from 1987. I kinda lowballed them on it, and I don't love doing that, but I was so interested in it that I had to give it a shot. There was a rack with comic sets, priced a little out of my budget as well. Behind the counter were more wall books, definitely more valuable than the other wall book section, but no major keys. I think the biggest key was the first Moon Knight. One wall had some newer deluxe hardcovers like 8 Billion Genies and I Am Legend. Next to that was a display case with a bunch of those vintage Star Wars figures that are getting a little old now that I've seen them in about 100 shops, as well as a tractor and some vintage Tonka cars. There were more oddities and artifacts throughout the shop, including this box set of colorized bone that I've surprisingly never seen before, and the life-size Holey Mobot, whose right hand was currently being repaired. This shop was cozy and eclectic, perfect for a New England town. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 1 point in bargain section, 2 points in wow factor, and 3 points in organization. That leaves Holy Moley's Comics and Collectibles with a total score of 12 out of 30 points. It was a lot like Command D, which has a lot of cool stuff, but it felt more like a garage sale. That brings us to the second That's Entertainment location in Fitchburg. This one felt significantly smaller than the mega shop in Worcester, but it also felt a little cleaner. The new issue section was in the back corner of the shop and had almost as many options as the Worcester shop. These were also nicely labeled, very accessible to new readers. I love it when they have an artist edition section. The indie selection was pretty good, maybe not as extensive and well organized as the other location, but still better than average. The back issues were definitely in better shape at this location, or at least the holding bins were more structurally sound. The prices were okay. You could find a few lower grade issues from the early 80s for $2 or $3, but most of the Bronze Age stuff was too expensive for me. A lot of these issues I bought in pretty good condition for $1, $2, or $3 each. The back issue section seemed smaller at this location, but it had some quality. Even though the prices were too high for me, a shop with this many issues of Machine Man is rare. The X-Men books definitely had me raising eyebrows because, sure, if you're a die-hard Overstreet price guide follower, I guess these issues might be priced quote-unquote correctly, but I've found most of these in dollar bins often and recently. Issue 223 was $11, maybe the highest I saw on the whole trip. Next to the back issues were some comic sets, including all of V for Vendetta for $50. One of my favorite parts of That's Entertainment is their used graphic novel section, which had this awesome Tintin comic with the original art, not the redone work that most people are familiar with. A lot of the books in here were around 20% off, and there was some good stuff. And below these, they had one single box of dollar books, which was mostly Gru. Very considerate of them to put the sticker directly on the cover. They also had some classic graphic novels on display, including many of my favorite books, which made me more interested in buying the other titles on that shelf that I hadn't heard of. Sorry about the focus. iPhone 16 is a piece of garbage, and Apple is an amoral parasite. Wouldn't it be nice if these wall books were in focus? Wouldn't it just be delightful if you didn't have to be a professional photographer to successfully take videos on a new iPhone? Look at all these wall books behind the counter that are giving me a headache as I edit this because it won't come into fricking focus. I sure wish this footage of the large graphic novel section was better so that you could see all the fantastic titles they have available. They had quite a bit of manga and a kids section, which is what this colorful blur is. Somewhere near the back of the shop, my phone finally decided to be useful as I was looking at the 8-tracks. This shop had a huge selection of board games, video games, tabletop games, and a gaming area that I didn't film because it was full of people. They also had action figures, vintage toys, and a local creator section. I sure would love to show you more of the cool stuff they had, but my camera decided that what I want isn't important. So I'll give them 6 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 3 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 0 points in wow factor, and 4 points in organization. Altogether, that's 21 points for the Fitchburg location of That's Entertainment. Not quite as strong as the Worcester location. The last shop on day 3 of my state tour was Geek Boutique in Clinton. Right away, they had a sign with information about a local artist event coming up. This shop was relatively small, and a good chunk of the shop was video games and toys. The new issues were on a wire rack in the middle of the shop with little labels on new issues of the week. The first side of the rack was DC and Image, looked like only Image as far as indie books, and the other side was Marvel books. Back issues took up the whole side wall, and these were all nicely bagged and boarded and labeled. The selection wasn't the most thorough, but prices were pretty good, usually $4 or $5 per issue, which is reasonable when the presentation is so good. Maybe I wasn't looking in the right spot, but I couldn't find any Uncanny X-Men comics. Plenty of Krakoan era stuff, though. There was a good number of wall books above the back issues with pretty good prices. First Jubilee for $40, First White Vision for $30, issue 5 of Avengers for $100. They also had the first appearance of Dr. Voodoo and that extra spicy Batman chest hair cover. Is $300 a good price for a 9.8 Absolute Batman issue 1 signed by Dragata and Snyder? I feel like that's probably reasonable. Down the wall, they had the first War Machine, first Rocket Raccoon, first Molecule Man, first Taskmaster, first Hobgoblin, first Madam Web, first Gambit, all the minor keys. Apparently, the first Punisher was in there somewhere. At the end of the back issue section were some boxes of comic sets, like the Rocket Raccoon miniseries, Runaways, V for Vendetta, and Watchmen. Not a terrible price on Watchmen. I was really tempted by these early printings of Pogo strips, but I'd already spent my budget for the day. At the other end of the back issues, they had a spring cleaning sale, which included a ton of dollar books, like All This Immortal Hulk. These were all bagged and boarded and nicely labeled, and they were even alphabetical. I had never heard of a lot of this, but it seemed like some good deals. They also had discount graded books, both signed and unsigned, for ridiculously cheap. Look, it's a State of Comics variant cover for Nice House on the Lake issue 1. I went there in part 2 of every comic shop in Michigan. You know, I can understand why people would grade really rare or really valuable books, but I don't get why some of these books got graded. The graphic novel section was behind the back issues, a good chunk of which was manga. The Marvel books went across the top row and then continued on the other side, even though the DC label was directly above the Marvel books. They did also have DC and some indie graphic novels, and these books were well curated, but I wouldn't call it extensive selection. The rest of the shop was video games, video game consoles, cool art prints by local artists, more video games, some Funko Pops and Pokemon cards, and a few action figures. I've heard that this shop is currently in a transition phase, but right now comics don't seem to be the main focus. So they earned 3 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, no points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Geek Boutique with a total score of 15 out of 30 points. A for average, Geek Boutique. The first shop of day 4 was Outer Limits in Waltham, and I really liked this shop, but we weren't allowed to film there. So I'm here outside the Outer Limits in Waltham. There's a sign. We got another sign right here. This shop has been here under the same owner since 1983. It is an amazing shop. I'm still in shock. It has everything that I could ever want to buy from a comic shop. I got a bunch of Marvel pocketbooks for great prices. I got a Buck Rogers book from, I think, the 70s. It's tons of updated graphic novels as well as the older stuff that I love. You can get anything from a year ago to 70 years ago. They've got all of it. They got Pulp Fiction books from the 30s and the 40s. They've got Disney toys from the 30s and the 40s. Back issues, I think they have around 30,000 back issues in there, and they're all pretty decently priced. Issue 223 of Uncanny X-Men, they had 4 copies. I think 3 of them were $8. 1 of them was $3. Most of the Uncanny X-Men from that era is around $8, $7, $8, $9. I did see some Avengers from the Bronze era that was around $2, $3, $4, so there's a mix. It's good value. More pocketbooks of Peanuts and BC and Marvel than I've seen in any other shop. More history crammed into the shop than I've seen in any other shop in the state so far. It's probably my favorite one of the trip so far. New issues. The new issues were good. They were all alphabetical. The ones that were new this week were labeled. There was a good selection of indie stuff, as well as, of course, the typical Marvel DC. Steve was great. He just didn't want us to film because it's cluttered. It looks cluttered on camera, which is a bummer because I would have loved to show you how awesome this shop is. It's one of my favorite shops. But I could film for hours and still not show you everything in there, so it's kind of a mixed blessing. It's fantastic. It's one of the best shops I've seen in all 3 states so far. I could spend all day here and then come back the next day and spend all day there again. It's great. You should go. I won't score them because I can't show it to you, and maybe they wouldn't have scored that high because of the way my rubric is designed, but they are a real gem of a shop only minutes from Boston. Next, we went to the Comic Stop in Watertown. This shop was extra cozy, but it packed a lot of flavor in there. Pardon the odd angle, I try not to make a habit of getting kids on camera. The new issues were in the back corner, organized alphabetically regardless of publisher, with the new issues of the week labeled. Selection was fine, some indie stuff, but not a ton. This was Saturday though, so there had been a few days for people to come by the issues of the week. New issues got sent to the spinner racks after being on the shelf, and they also got sorted by publisher. The back issue Peninsula here was 80s to current, and they had a ton of Alpha Flight. Another shop that bags and boards everything nicely and has clear price tags on the front. Shops that don't have obvious pricing make me suspicious of a scam. The prices were pretty good, usually $3 or $4 per issue. The X-Men books were in order but backwards, and the prices were fine, mostly $4, $5, or $6, with issue 223 coming in at $4 and 222 only $9. They also had a ton of pre-1980 back issues in these special boxes with some pretty thorough runs of series. These were around $5, $6, or $7 each, which isn't bad. At the bottom of the tower were some dollar bins. This box was mostly indie stuff that I wasn't very interested in. This other box had mostly new stuff with some Marvel and DC mixed in and an older issue here and there. Here's a box of $5 trades. I love to see boxes like this, especially when I can find something good like Manifest Destiny. Next to that was a box of kids comics on sale and a 75-cent bin that I didn't have time to go through. The graphic novels were also on sale, and that section was surprisingly large considering the limited space. The selection here was pretty good. It definitely felt updated and well curated. They had some wall books behind the counter, mostly minor keys. The first issue of Gru all the way on the left was cool to see. A display case near the back issues had more cool wall books like Early Tales to Astonish, Journey into Mystery, and Fantastic Four. And I scanned past them really fast, but those are some early issues of Avengers. Overall, this shop didn't have a lot of wiggle room, but it was very focused on comics, and I loved the cozy, family-owned New England vibes of the place. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 0 points in a wow factor, and 4 points in organization. And this scoring is not an indication of how successful this shop will or won't be. It's just what I envision as the ideal comic shop, which probably only exists in my dreams. for now. The next shop was Magic Dragon Comics in Arlington. This shop was much bigger and had a lot more variety. The new issues were along this wall, alphabetical regardless of publisher again, with some labels for new issues of the week and Ghost Machine, Energon Universe, things like that. The selection was really good. Lots of indie books and lots of variants. We were there just a few days before a giant sale they were having, or so all these signs said. Above the new issues they had these cool wall books, very clearly priced, some of which I've never seen before, like that Masters of the Universe issue with the 25th anniversary cover. They also had some bigger keys like First Beta Ray Bill, First Gambit, First Power Man and Iron Fist, and some other cool stuff like the new issue 1 of Ultimate Spider-Man, which I guess is valuable now, and a couple awesome Dave Stevens covers. I keep pointing out that first issue of the new Wonder Woman, so here it is again. I love this rack they had of issue 1s, 5 for $10. What a great way to get good series in the hands of new fans who might feel overwhelmed by all the options. The back issues took up a good chunk of the shop, and they were nicely sorted, but the pricing was a little much. They had a color dot system, but some books didn't have color dots, they had regular price tags, and the books that weren't bagged and had no tag were a separate price that was printed on each box. Which, sure, means that everything is technically priced, but would it really have been that much harder to just price everything individually? Anyway, even the issues that weren't bagged and boarded were in really good condition, so much so that I wished they were at least bagged to preserve them. All these issues of Fantastic Four were $3 each, which seems a little steep in the mid-300s, especially considering they're not bagged, but the farther back in the series you go, the better deal it is. They had a whole box of these oversized comic magazines, but they were priced at the counter. Next to that was a bunch of Silver Age and Bronze Age books, open to the air with no price tags. When I asked, I was given the estimate that these were around $10 each, maybe more. Maybe it's just me, but I would bag and board anything more than $2. I couldn't find any Uncanny X-Men comics, I think most of them had just been bought, but I was told that there were a few boxes of those issues downstairs, and the best guess was that issue 223 would be around $3 or 4 for $10. Which, if that's the case, that's not bad, but I wish I could see the issues. The graphic novel wall was impressive, with labeled sections for creators like Frank Miller and Alan Moore on top of the shelves of alphabetized books. They also had a good number of deluxe editions and omnibuses. There was a nice kids section in the back, and the action figure selection was thorough. These pegboards look empty now, but after they processed their big shipment, I'm sure they filled up. On top of all the typical boxed figures, they also had a bunch of discount lead figures and all these awesome Batmobiles throughout the ages. They were only $5 each, so I was really tempted to grab a couple. One of the coolest things in the shop was this trophy that they won the last 2 years at a comic shop trivia event that's hosted by Comicazi, which you'll see later in this video. I love seeing that greater sense of community among the comic shops. So they earned 2 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 1 point in no wow factor, and 2 points in organization. That leaves Magic Dragon Comics with a total score of 14 out of 30 points. They had a lot of cool stuff, but didn't say much in their survey to help them gain more points. The next shop was Zenith Comics in Malden, which is another ex-New England Comics location, and I don't know the exact age of the owner, but I have a feeling he's the youngest shop owner I've met so far. Of course, I want to give credit to the shop owners who have been running shops for decades, and I don't want to make light of that effort, but I also want to encourage y'all to support these brand new shops run by young people, like this one or Sentinel Comics in Georgia. The old generation of shop owners are starting to retire, and we need new blood to keep these shops alive. So anyway, a shop owner around my age is really cool to see. The new issue section was surprisingly thorough, with plenty of titles from all the indie publishers, including a couple I'm not familiar with. It looked like they keep quite a few months worth of new issues on display, so the new issue section was huge. I didn't see any labels or staff picks though, other than the big sign over the new issues of the week. There was an island of back issues towards the back of the shop, and I started with X-Men. These were all individually priced and at least bagged, but most of them were $8 each. I'm sure running a shop this close to Boston has crazy overhead costs, but that price is just too high for me. I looked at the Simonson run of Thor and didn't see any price tags. They might have been on the back, but I guess I was too distracted to notice. I was complaining about my phone camera at the time. These issues of Batman were $6, $7, or $9 each, a little too high for me again. Next to the back issues was an island of dollar bins, my favorite kind of bin. These dollar bins were average, with a mix of new stuff and 80s stuff. I don't think I ended up grabbing anything, but I didn't look very long. The graphic novel section was good, definitely comparable to the other New England Comics locations, including Black Hole Comics. Zenith had the same price breakdown on the trades that all of the other New England locations had. The wall books behind the counter were relatively common, but they had great prices. I'd be tempted to buy some of those if I went back. Probably the biggest key available was the first Deadpool in nice condition. There was a table with graphic novel recommendations and discounted omnibuses right by the front of the shop, which was very inviting. They had a manga section by the graphic novel wall, this super cool old Tick comic standee, and a whole section in the bay window of discounted trades, one of which was this copy of Barack Hussein Obama, which was a little confusing to me. Most of these were pretty outdated and losing their color, but that's why they were discounted, I suppose. It's important that I mention that this shop is not on its way out, it's right at the beginning of a new era. It's already been months since I took this footage, and I'm sure there have been a lot of changes. I will strongly encourage you to go check it out for yourself and help support this basically brand new shop, because the owner has a lot of changes in mind and he'll need good customers to help make those changes. The bones are good, it just needs time. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 3 points in bargain section, 2 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Zenith Comics with a total score of 18 out of 30 points. Pretty good, and it's only going to get better. Next we went to the shop that everybody kept telling us about, Comicazi in Somerville. Now there's no way that I'll be able to show you everything in this shop because it's ridiculously packed with cool stuff, and I went during Porch Fest, so the shop was extra packed with customers. But I'll do my best to show you some highlights and the basics, and you should just get out there and visit for yourself sometime. Before even getting inside, there's a shelf of 50-cent toys and vintage toys and individually priced comic bundles to look through. Just look at all these discount toys. The welcome mat looked familiar too. As soon as you walk inside, you have one small part of their massive graphic novel section, with still more toys crammed into every crevice. The selection of indie books on these shelves boggles the mind. Apparently Joe Troman, the guitarist from Fall Out Boy, was visiting later that month for a signing. And don't think I missed that sign for a book club. They had an island of discounted graphic novels, some of which as cheap as $6, and a lot more half off. The front of the shop had a ton of games, a kids section, and a cartoon section, including these pocket books, and plenty of great newspaper strip collections. As we moved through the shop, we passed a lot more shelves of graphic novels. I almost said that this side room was my favorite part, but then I remembered that the rest of the shop is also my favorite part. But the side room had all these cool vintage toys, like packed display cases and boxes along the wall, every inch covered in inventory. Also in this side room were all the rarest comics lining the walls in these display cases. Just look at these golden age books like issue 9 of Action Comics, issue 11 of Batman, and that super cool machine gun Batman cover that I saw at Galactic Quest. There were tons of other keys like First Black Panther, First Galactus, First Wolverine, and lots more. Another display case had the first Deadpool and a bunch of other keys that were panned over too quickly. This collection of comic-related cups was cool, this case of Hot Wheels cars was even cooler, and this guy was interesting. They had separate sections for showcase comics and first appearances, which is a category I've never seen at a shop before. The showcase books were mostly Silver Age stuff, but also had some keys, like these issues of Avengers that were maybe priced a bit high. The row all the way at the end had these brand coupons, I guess is what they are, and this cool issue of Smilin' Jack. On the wall they had some framed issues, including what I assume is an actual copy of Fantastic Four issue 1, but it wasn't for sale. They also had this display case full of awards for the shop, so clearly they're doing something right. As we moved into the rest of the shop, we found a rack of new trade paperbacks, as well as more toys, of course. The new issue section covered this whole wall with built-in lights and had very extensive selection. A whole lot of indie books to choose from, but no labels as far as I could see. I also wasn't sure which issues were the newest. Moving on, we found even more graphic novel shelves, like all these Marvel shelves, which had a good number of older printings. I had never seen this copy of Spider-Man Torment before, but I wasn't gonna pay $30 for it. This whole section was omnibus hardcovers for 30% off or buy one get one free, which is ridiculous. Finally, we reached the main back issue section, which was a peninsula right in the middle of the shop. I had to scoot this giant metal soup can out of the way so that I could see the X-Men books, which were all nicely bagged and boarded, but priced on the back. The selection was crazy thorough, but I pulled out issue 203 because I normally find that for $1, and it was $13 here. They didn't have issue 223, but 224 was $8. Issue 230 is my favorite issue of X-Men, but I'm sorry, it's not worth $10. They did have $2 bins below the main back issues with books that weren't bagged and boarded. The $2 Captain America issues were really good. Definitely a few issues that I probably should have picked up. The main back issue bins were packed pretty tight, so I didn't go through them all that much. The back room was just an avalanche of toys and cards and games and various nerdy stuff. They had another discount toy section where I found a few Tactics figures, which is one of my favorite games, and 4 of this saber-tooth metal figure, but none of the ones that I'm missing. I really should have bought this gunship. It was only $4. This is the only shop where I've seen the Jabba sail barge from those vintage Star Wars sets that I always point out, and they had boxes of the figures. I was absolutely blown away by the volume of cool stuff that this shop had packed into their little space, and I would happily spend a whole weekend digging around in there. They even had a little cantina, so I wouldn't even have to leave to feed myself. It's the perfect nerd trap. Everybody told me I would love this shop, to the point where I started to get skeptical, like my expectations were gonna be too high. But this shop is definitely one of the most noteworthy comic shops in the whole state, especially considering the shop still felt professional and orderly, even though every square inch was buried under a pile of stuff for sale. Anyway, I can't show you everything, so you'll have to go yourself. So they earned 7 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 3 points in oh wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Comicazi with a total score of 25 out of 30 points. That puts it right up there with That's Entertainment, which is still the highest scored shop in Massachusetts so far. The next shop was Hub Comics, also in Somerville, which was a very different vibe. Instead of thin hallways packed with vintage curiosities, this shop was open, full of natural light, and felt like a futuristic library you might see on TV. One half of the shop had the single issues, and had the weekly titles set aside where they were easy to find. The selection wasn't as thorough as the last few shops, but they had the main image books on top of the big two. The back issue table was relatively small, but every issue was bagged and boarded, and series were labeled. Selection was limited, and some of the prices were higher than I'd like, but a few of the Fantastic Four issues were reasonably priced. A few of these bins were dollar books, and they were organized pretty well, but a lot of that space was taken up by the dividers. The bookshelves in this room went all the way up to the ceiling, and they were immaculately labeled by genre. The art books, how-to books, and deluxe editions were pristine and gorgeous, an absolutely fantastic selection of graphic literature and reference material. These bookshelves wrapped around most of the shop and even had a non-fiction section and an alternative section, a staggering amount of comic history that I don't think I've ever seen collected in one place before. They also had these instant collection bundles where you could get a few trade paperbacks in a row for a discounted price. Comicazi also had that, but they were on nice display here. I loved the book display island they had in the middle of the main room, just covered in graphic novels that I had never heard of, but clearly bursting with flavor. They had signs for the Graphic Novel of the Month Club, which automatically earns them a point, and they had a huge section of young adult graphic literature, including the second copy of this original Tintin book that I saw on this trip. There was a table with local stuff and micro press, all of which looked flavorful and high quality. As I'm reviewing this footage, I can't help but stare in awe at the exhaustive selection of graphic literature that's available in this shop. Clearly someone has put countless hours into curating the inventory. There were a lot of great shops in Massachusetts, but there are very few that I feel strongly compelled to go back and visit. This shop is at the top of my list for shops that I need to spend more time in. It may not be the best shop if you want to go swimming in dirty back issues and find dusty old bargain books, but if you're a fan of the comic medium, this place is heavenly. So they earned 6 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 2 points in a wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Hub Comics with a total score of 23 out of 30 points. And for a shop that's more of a graphic novel shop than a comic shop, that's a fantastic score. The next shop was a much newer shop, Amaya Bros Comics in Cambridge. You could tell immediately that Gambit was a shop favorite. This giant purple arch in the middle of the shop was a very unique bit of flavor that the shop had. At the time of filming, Diamond was going through a whole thing that I'll let other comic tubers tell you about, and the effect of that was a lot of comic shops not stocking DC issues, such as this shop. They only had Marvel books and a few books from IDW because they came from the same distributor. The back issues were sorted mostly by price increments, but they also had a Silver and Bronze Age bin and a Halloween-themed bin. Prices in the Silver Bronze Age bin were okay. Definitely some prices that were too high for me, but some of them were good deals. They told me that they were planning to have a big back issue sale in a month or so with all the boxes of back issues that were hidden under the tables, but I unfortunately wasn't around for that. You can see that most of these books were pretty beat up, and they had been sitting in an attic for at least 40 years, but there were some great reader copies in there. If anybody went to the sale and bought some of these, let us know in the comments. I found some X-Men comics in the $21 to $50 bin, but they were usually $6 each, and they didn't have 223, but 224 was $6. $6. I think it's interesting when shops have issues sorted by price. Sometimes it's nice to start with a budget and see what you can afford, but other times it's nice to go to a series and hunt for a specific issue, and you might spend more just because you finally found it. It doesn't help when the comics that are sorted by price aren't even alphabetical. They had some decent keys, like the first Poison Ivy, first Black Costume, and some more modern stuff. The wall books were mostly variants, which is a category I don't know much about. They also had some original art on the wall, not something you find at every shop. The owner showed me some more original Gambit pages, like this Azrar page that he had gotten tattooed on his arm, and these other two awesome pages. The single dollar bin at the front of the shop had some decent books in there, definitely some stuff I would have bought if I wasn't short on space. They also had a ton of graded books, mostly newer stuff, but probably my favorite graded book was the first appearance of the Sentinels behind the counter. Overall, this shop was pretty small, but it was flavorful and it had some gems. So they earned 3 points in community involvement, 2 points in back issues, 1 point in new issues, 1 point in bargain section, 1 point in a wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Amaya Bros Comics with a total score of 12 out of 30 points. It seemed like a lot of their focus was on graded comics and Pokemon cards, which is fine. Cambridge is a college town, so of course there has to be a Newbury Comics nearby. I ran in by myself to film this one real quick, but I didn't expect it to be up this long, curved, oddly outdoors-looking hallway. I guess this building used to be a parking garage, and now it's like a hipster mall or something. This location of Newbury looked exactly the same as a bunch of the other ones, but they were especially friendly here. As I've said about previous Newburys, these are mostly pop culture stores with a big emphasis on music and not a ton of actual comics. They carry the new stuff and a bunch of graphic novels, but not an impressive amount of graphic novels and no back issues. If you're looking for random trendy accessories that you'll use for like 2 months and then forget about, they've got you covered. I will admit that I am tempted to get some of these tiny things. They're not useful at all, and I have no idea what I'd do with them, but they're just so enticing. The marketing voodoo just gets to me. Anyway, that's another Newbury location. I already rated them in the first video. Then, not even a block away, was one of my absolute favorite shops in all of Massachusetts. Million Year Picnic is a shop with barely any space, crammed into the basement with a couple windows that peek out at the street above. Every inch of this space was full of books going all the way up to the ceiling in between the rafters. I felt like I was in a wizard's library or an elaborate illustration of a whimsical book nook. This might be the oldest comic shop I've been to so far, by just a little bit. They go back to mid-1974. I think this wall under the window was new issues of the week, but I'm not totally sure. This was a Saturday, so a lot of the new books had sold. Recent issues spread out along the wall, organized alphabetically, and the publisher selection was very extensive. Not a ton of labels, but if you dug around, you would find what you're looking for. The part I was most excited about was this shelf of old printings of cartoon books, which is the #1 thing that I love adding to my collection. I grabbed a couple issues of Nostalgia Press comics from the 70s, one of my favorite reprint series. They had a ton of Pogo books from the 50s and the 60s, this gorgeous Prince Valiant hardcover from the 50s, Alley-Oop, Odd Bodkins, Flyin' Jenny, Red Rider, Twin Earths, and so much more retro gold. If you want to know what to get me for Christmas, just check that shelf. Their selection of modern graphic novels was also insane, with tons of books I've never heard of. The DC section of graphic novels was well curated with a first edition of The Dark Knight Returns. Another shelf had graphic novels sorted by creator, with artists such as Bendis, Brubaker, Hickman, Ennis, Kirkman, and then Mignola, and a young adult section on another shelf. The Marvel shelf was up to date, and you could find some lesser known gems amid the blockbusters. The very back corner of the shop had an astonishing assortment of adult books, not necessarily spicy, but mature. I was blown away by the variety of titles they had here, a selection only comparable to shops like That's Entertainment and Hub Comics. They also had a ridiculous amount of zines and micropress books, and then behind the counter, they had a bunch of Silver and Bronze Age books on the wall, but not all the covers were visible. I love those issues of Guilty and Alarming Tales, and of course I didn't miss that first issue of Nick Fury. Moving towards the other side of the shop, there was another large bookshelf covered in young adult graphic novels with stupendous selection. Comic shop owners, take note of this selection because it is on point. Sure, lots of shops have Tintin, but I never see Spirou or Blake and Mortimer. Just about one half of the shop is the back issue area, which also has a ton of beautiful editions of graphic novels on the walls. Of course, I'm a sucker for the pocketbooks, and I was a little distracted at the time, but my dad was filming this and he said he sent a letter letter to the creator of Tumbleweeds when he was a kid, and he got a thank you letter back. What a great reminder that I should be sending letters to all my favorite artists. Let's take a look at the Avengers back issues. The prices were on the back and upside down, which I don't love, but the prices themselves were surprisingly good. A lot of these Bronze Age Avengers issues were $2, $3, or $4. They had a lot of series labeled using custom dividers, which were clearly well worn, but still did their job. These older issues of Tales of the Unexpected were nice, around $8 or $9 each. Around this time, the owner, Tony, showed up, and we spent a while chatting about the history of the shop and the presence of comics in the state. Then he pulled out issue 223 of Uncanny X-Men for us, which was priced at $8, definitely the higher end of the spectrum. They also had probably the most issues of Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos that I've ever seen at a shop, for anywhere between $5 and $25 each. I could spend all day showing you all the interesting details of this shop, but you'll have to trust me when I say that there's something here for everybody. The flavor crammed into this space is unbelievable, and this shop is at the top of my list of shops I want to visit again if I'm back in Mass. So they earned 4 points in community involvement, 5 points in back issues, 3 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 1 point in oh wow factor, and 2 points in organization. That leaves Million Year Picnic with a total score of 17 out of 30 points. And just like some of my other favorite shops, just because I really like them doesn't mean that they're gonna score super high. They've been around for 50 years, so they must be doing something right. The next shop was also pretty awesome. It was Friar Tuck's Comics and Collectibles in Brookline, which was only a year and a half old when I visited. To get there, you have to go up these stairs, which has this assortment of cool comic covers at the top. Then there are these double doors at the entrance to the shop itself, which Friar Tuck himself later closed for us so we could see the full mural. It was still in progress, but it might be done by now. After going through the doors, you enter this interesting curved hallway that goes around a little office space, like a ticket stand at a theater. Friar Tuck said this building was a real estate school for 40 years, and before that it was a Jewish community center, and their stage was in this space. What a cool history for the building. Definitely more interesting than a lot of comic shops. And then once you've gone through the curved hallway, you enter the main shop space, which feels massive and includes a giant projected screen. It's much bigger than it looks in this footage, and there's a mural of curtains that were painted at both ends. The wall books at the shop wrapped all the way around the main room, and everything in the shop was 20% off while we were there. They might even still be having that sale. And that's good, because some of these wall books were quite a bit higher than I expected, like issue 211 of X-Men for $70, or $225 for issue 88 of Wolverine. This German issue of Superman from, I think, 1950 was super cool though. There were a ton more awesome books on the wall, but a lot of this footage goes too quickly to properly show you. Back issue section was huge. Friar Tuck estimated 100,000 books, with the top rack easy to see and the shelves below it easy to pull out. They look like they're just boxes stacked on each other, but you can pull out each individual box. I looked through the X-Men books first, of course, and every issue was high grade in a brand new bag and board and had very clear pricing on the front of the bag. Most of these issues past 300 are dollar books as far as I'm concerned, but the presentation here might convince some people otherwise. Here are some of the issues I show for most shops. Definitely higher than what I'm used to seeing, some of them coming down to the $5 or $7 range, but a copy of 223 for $10 felt just wrong. I didn't spend much more time looking through back issues after that because I felt like I saw what I needed to see. The new issue section was reportedly the best in Boston, which may be true. They certainly had a thorough selection, but I didn't get the best footage of that either. It also seemed that recent issues were up on the wall, organized alphabetically, and then put into short boxes, and then sorted to be put into the back issue section, but the newest issues every week were in this short box by the supplies. I might be confused, I might be wrong, but I don't know why you would put your brand new issues in a box where customers can't see all the covers at once. But I might be wrong. Friar Tuck gave us a full tour and showed us the boxes of monster magazines, the section in the corner with art books and commentary, a rack full of sets and runs with an EC section and a comic commentary section on the other side, his life-size Spider-Man, which earns him a point for giant decorations, the kids section, and his massive magazine section, which I'll show you more of later. The comics in the display case were ridiculous, packed with key issues, and all 25% off, which is good because they were a bit pricey. He also pointed out that he's negotiable, so don't get too stuffy about price tags before you go there. He also had a huge graphic novel selection, which he was proud to say he had a lot of older, obscure graphic novels. I did end up lowballing him on an old printing of Captain Britain, which I feel a little bad about again, but I think he'll be okay. The adult section in the back was probably the largest adult section I've seen so far, and I don't recognize most of these titles, but they're what you would expect to find. Way back at the entrance of the shop, there was a stack of dollar bins, which didn't have the best selection ever, but you could find at least a few books in there for good deals. And as promised, here are some oversized Marvel and DC magazines like Conan and Captain Marvel. These were definitely too expensive for me, but the selection was really good, and they were all nicely bagged and boarded. Here's a shot of the C box of magazines like Cracked, Crazy, Creepy, Crusade, and a ton of titles I've never heard of. I could spend all day digging around in this shop finding hidden gems all over the place, but this is another one of those shops that you'll just have to visit for yourself if you want the full experience. Every corner had something crammed in, but it didn't feel overly cramped at all. There were so many cool decorations all over the place, bringing a lot of flavor to a shop that's surprisingly new. So definitely don't let the prices scare you off. Just go and check it out for yourself. So they earned 6 points in community involvement, 6 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 2 points in bargain section, 3 points in wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Friar Tuck's Comics and Collectibles with a total score of 23 out of 30 points. An excellent shop, one of my favorites in the state. The next shop was Comicopia in Boston. People had been telling us about this shop throughout the trip, so I was excited to finally get there. They've been open for more than 30 years, and they've had artists like Hayden Sherman and Tyler Boss visit recently. This shop was relatively small, but it packed a lot of stuff in. The new issues were towards the back, with DC issues on one side of a rack and Marvel issues on the other side. There was another rack with all the indie books, of which there was a solid selection. New issues of the week were all the way at the back of the shop, with a list of all the new books that week posted nearby. The manga section was nuts, like bookshelves wrapping around half the shop entirely covered in manga. The other half of the walls were covered in graphic novels, and on top of the usual Marvel and DC books, they also had an impressive selection of indie books, almost in the same league as Hub Comics or A Million Year Picnic. The closest thing they had to back issues was this rack of 10 number ones for $8 or series bundles. I must not have gotten any footage of it, but they had a book that was a compilation of cartoons about American history, and I'm really regretting that I didn't buy it. Now I have to go online and find it because it was exactly the kind of thing I want in my classroom. Anyway, they earned 2 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 2 points in new issues, 1 point in bargain section, no points in wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Comicopia with a total score of 13 out of 30 points. If you want to buy manga or graphic novels, this is a great place to do it. Next, we took a quick walk down the road to Newbury Street itself. Wow, I wonder what comic shop is over here. It's the original Newbury Comics, established in 1978. This location was huge, maybe the most square footage of all the Newbury shops, and had 3 levels of geek stuff. As you go up the stairs, there's a giant mural, and then all the way at the back of the upper level is the comic section. Of course, the new issue selection is great, the graphic novel selection is fine, and the back issue selection is poor. But they have hats, and manga, and shirts, and plushies, and friendly robots, and lots more random stuff upstairs. Ground level has Funko Pops, and socks, and magnets, and books, and more nerdy stuff we've already seen at other locations. Then you go way down to the nerd dungeon, where they have their bottomless pit of vinyl and CDs. Also, all the rest of the random stuff that didn't fit on the other levels. I think the best purchases in this shop were the Wallace and Gromit mugs. As always, their branding is impeccable, and there's no mistaking what shop you're in. They've already received a grade, so let's move on to our last stop of day 5. The very first comic shop I ever visited in Massachusetts years ago, the Newbury Comics in Faneuil Hall Marketplace. This is a super pretty downtown Boston touristy area where they've stuffed a bunch of food vendors into an old spaceship factory or something. This area is Boston maxing to the extreme. It feels like Matt Damon may appear at any moment with a mop. I was very tired by this point. I had totally run out of steam, so I didn't pay any attention to the 2 kids who were following us around the entire time because they wanted to be in the video. This location feels unique among all the Newburys because it has this gorgeous staircase right in the middle. The inventory was basically exactly the same as the previous location. Lots of nerdy stuff all over the place. They did have a discount section for graphic novels, which is not common at these shops. They weren't super cheap, maybe 20% off. I'm running out of things to say about Newbury Comics, so I'll just use this time to talk about the first time I went here. You ever walk into a comic shop expecting to spend multiple hours there, and then you immediately have to use the bathroom? Well, that happens to me all the time, which is part of why having a public restroom is on the rubric. The first time I went here, I don't know what I ate that day, but as soon as I got to the top floor, I realized I was gonna have a problem. So I asked if they had a restroom. They did not, so I had to run around to other shops asking. Then I had to go find the public restroom in the next building over, and then there was a line, and then the restroom was a mess, and it was overall a terrible experience. Thanks a lot, Newbury. Anyway, you've probably seen enough of this shop now, so let's move on to the first shop of day 6, which was, oh god, please no, another Newbury Comics in Burlington. You know, there was one morning on the trip when we were heading to our first shop, and the camera guy, who I appreciate very much, stopped to grab breakfast, which was a pickled herring calzone thing, and he was eating that ball of chemical warfare rather loudly, so I asked him if he wanted to listen to music in the car, and he was like, nah, I'm good. So I sat there listening to him smack his lips and make various wet sounds in what was otherwise silence for about 3 minutes. Then I asked him again if maybe music was part of the plan for that day, and he said, maybe when I finish eating, which was pretty much the worst possible answer I could have gotten. So I'm intimately familiar with the sounds and smells of pickled herring being eaten is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, that was Newbury Comics in the Burlington Mall. Then we went down the road to Counterplay Comics, Collectibles, and Cosplay, also in Burlington. This shop was clearly community focused. They had lots of game days and events, and they do drink and draws, and they have local artists come in all the time to sell their stuff. New issues of the week were over in this corner, and this footage is from a Sunday, so a lot of the new issues had sold. Selection was fine, and the previous week's books gave me a good idea of how many titles they stocked. The previous week's books took up a ton of space with some kind of numbering system. They had a kids section with a ton of small toys and action figures and some kid-friendly comic books. The action figures and toys spilled out into the main shop with quite a few impressive vintage Star Wars toys. While we were at the counter, I checked the wall books. Nothing crazy, mostly minor keys and cool covers. They also had a couple boxes of nicer Bronze Age books, and these were priced okay, but definitely more than I would spend. But again, I'm a lot cheaper than Overstreet Price Guide and all those other guides tell me to be. After that, I finally noticed the actual back issue section, which was pretty substantial. The first series I checked was Micronauts, which I was aggressively collecting on this trip, and the selection was great. Most of the issues were $3, which is just fine. The X-Men comics went back decently far, and the prices were also just fine. A couple spikes here and there, but usually $3 for those great issues around 200. Issue 223 was $3, which is what I want to see. They had a rack of $5 trades, which didn't look like it had anything I was interested in, and quite a few dollar bins, which were a little buried at the moment. I pulled out a few, just enough to see that you could find some good stuff if you did some digging. This is one of those shops that has random piles of discounted toys and trinkets throughout the shop, which is definitely something I like to see. Of course, they also had a ton of manga and some graphic novels here and there, but a lot of the space was saved for gaming and gaming supplies. There were some gamers there while we were filming, and I didn't want to get them on camera without permission. So they earned 5 points in community involvement, 4 points in back issues, 2 points for new issues, 4 points in bargain section, 0 points in wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Counterplay Comics, Collectibles, and Cosplay with a total score of 19 out of 30 points. Finally, a shop that's not Newbury. Well, then of course we had to go all the way down to North Dartmouth so we could go to another mall where we found another location of Newbury Comics. And this location was just like every other mall location of Newbury, except maybe it had a few more of these cool editions of classic books that I really wanted to buy. I had just about reached the end of my rope, and I was desperate for little details that might make this location stand out, when to my very pleasant surprise, I got to meet Mr. Newbury Comics himself, or Tubi maybe is what they call him. You guys, I was so excited to finally have something unique happen at Newbury Comics. This made it all worth it. Thank you so much to the employees who made that happen. You have no idea how desperately my sanity was trying to hang on at that point. So thank goodness for a Newbury Comics that finally cheered me up. Then we went to Twilight Comics in New Bedford, where we weren't allowed to film, and New Bedford felt weird. Weird vibes there. Alright, you lily-livered landlubbers, we're here in New Bedford at Twilight Comics. Frick that guy. Frick that guy. This shop is another one I was not allowed to film inside. That's okay. It's a little bit sparse in there. We had a big old wall full of new issues. Interestingly enough, it was only Marvel and DC and one Image title on the wall, but then there were a bunch of other indie books in boxes that were like brand new. So I don't know what's going on there. The back issues were sparse, not terribly priced for what they had, but if you're looking for something particular, you might not find it here. There were some wall books of some keys, but not really the keys that you would expect to see in a comic shop. Just some keys. What else? Graphic novels. He had a whole wall of graphic novels down on the ground. 35% off everything there. Lots of Marvel Epic collections. Not super extensive. There were some dollar bins. I looked through them. You can get some good stuff in there, but nothing I wanted. They have a Lego Titanic. That's pretty cool. Other than that, it's all right. It's an all right shop. They got some stuff. They don't got some stuff. It is what it is. Then we finally got to cross the bridge to the world-famous Cape Cod, where we only had 2 more shops to go. Which, of course, there has to be a Newbury Comics in Cape Cod. This is the Barnstable location, and I didn't even ask my camera guy to come in with me because they were closing in like 5 minutes. I know that we missed 1, maybe 2 Newbury locations in Massachusetts, but if I'm this tired of Newbury just talking about it, imagine how much I didn't want to cram any more Newberries into the trip at the time. Believe it or not, I planned for a full day of extra time, but every second of it got sucked up by plans going awry. And I feel like nobody's gonna mind if I just move on to the very last shop of the trip, Cape Comics in Hyannis, which is located inside the gaming shop Vanguard Tabletop Gaming. I had been looking forward to ending the trip on the Cape the whole time, and Rob from Cape Comics had been in contact with me throughout the trip. Even though he was tied up somewhere else, the other guys tidied up the comic nook for us so that we could film. The comic section of this shop was really new, but they had a library cart with graphic novels right at the front of the shop, and they also had a very busy gaming schedule. They had a petite new issue section in the hallway, just Marvel, DC, and a couple Image and IDW books. The comic area was just this little room here, at least for the time being, where they had another shelf of new graphic novels and a bunch of filing cabinets with back issues. The Spider-Man selection in here was great, very thorough, all the way back to issue 100. Pricing was fine. Issue 221, which I know to be a pretty cheap issue, was $6. The X-Men comics were also very thorough, going all the way back to issue 103. There was a big chunk missing right around the Outback era, but issue 220 was $5, so that's probably what issue 223 would be. The wall books weren't that crazy, just minor key stuff, but some of the signatures on the books were nuts, and there were a lot of sketch covers. I think Rob said he knows Ryan Otley and Robert Kirkman, so he had a lot of work by them. They did also have a graded copy of the first appearance of Punisher, which was probably their most expensive item. So that was about it for the comic section, but we wandered around the rest of the building for fun, and we found a whole lot of space for gaming. I don't know if I've ever seen beanbags in a shop before. I considered not scoring this shop, but I want to prove that even brand new shops with not much space can still earn points. So they earned 5 points in community involvement, 3 points in back issues, 1 point for new issues, 0 points in bargain section, 1 point in a wow factor, and 4 points in organization. That leaves Cape Comics with a total score of 14 out of 30 points. Not the most impressive shop, but a great place to end the Every Comic Shop in Massachusetts state tour. Then we finally had a chance to relax and enjoy ourselves, so we went to the salt marshes. It was very smelly, but also very pretty, and anytime you can see crabs is a great time. And there you have it, folks, another state crossed off my list. As most of you know, I started teaching this year, so my free time has dwindled quite a bit. I would love to do 3 states a year if I can, because I don't want this project to take the rest of my life. I don't mind raising funds and then covering the rest of the costs for the trip myself, but it's the editing that really takes it out of me. I hate editing, I just don't trust anybody else to do a good job. But at this point, I would consider asking for help so that I can just focus on the planning and the filming. So if you know someone who likes these videos and could edit them in the same style, let me know. Also, I want to be clear, I do this because I love comic shops and I want to see them succeed. It is never my intention to make a shop look bad or to convince people not to shop there. I would much rather convince people to try new shops and support the shops that are closest to them. Going to brick and mortar shops to buy comics is one of the most charming facets of this hobby, and I want to help perpetuate that tradition. So please, support your local comic shop, share this video with your friends so they know how many comic shops are out there, and let me know what state you think I should do next. I'm Kurt Williams, and you are somebody else.